Think we spent a century believing the Tyrannosaurus rex was the undisputed king of the dinosaurs? The fossil record disagrees. It shows the tyrant king being butchered repeatedly by a vegetarian. You know the image. Herds of gentle, horned giants grazing on prehistoric ferns. Lumbering cows with shields for faces. Peaceful victims of hungry predators. This image is a lie. 14% of all Triceratops skulls bear deep puncture wounds. Not from predators. From their own kind. These were not random skirmishes. The wounds cluster on the same anatomical points. The jugal bones. The squamosals. The frill margins. As if each generation perfected the art of destroying the generation before it. This was not a prehistoric cow. This was a solitary, 12-ton biological siege engine that spent its entire existence either impaling its own species or ambushing apex predators. But here is the question that should disturb you. Why does the fossil record show tyrannosaurs with catastrophic injuries that look less like defensive wounds from cornered prey, and more like premeditated ambush from behind? A 40-foot predator. Attacked from the rear. By something that eats plants. The paleontologists who discovered these wounds could not explain the geometry. The angles did not suggest a cornered animal fighting for its life. They suggested something far worse. Intent. You assume the predator hunts the prey. You assume the horns were a last resort. You assume the frill was for display. Every assumption is wrong. To understand how a plant eater could shatter a predator's skeleton, you first have to understand what was hiding beneath that 8-foot frill. And what was engineered into those horns. Consider mass. 12,000 kilograms. The equivalent of 6 modern automobiles compressed into a single biological frame. This is not an animal you outrun. This is not an animal you intimidate. This is a wrecking ball wrapped in keratin. The twin brow horns extend from the skull like twin armor-piercing kinetic penetrators. In fossil form, they appear modest. But fossils lie. The bony core you see in museums is only the scaffold. In life, each horn was sheathed in keratin, the same material as rhinoceros horns, eagle talons, human fingernails. That sheath added length. It added mass. It added a self-sharpening edge. Imagine 2 rhino horns stacked end to end. That is the true length of each weapon. Biological full metal jackets, designed not for defense, but for puncture. For penetration. For sliding through a theropod's femur like a ballistic missile through wet concrete. But raw kinetic force means nothing without precision targeting. The skull of the Triceratops measured 2.5 meters. 1/3 of the animal's total body length was head. And that head was not merely a battering ram. It was a sensor platform. The eyes sat low, angled for wide peripheral coverage. Optimized not for scanning the horizon, but for detecting lateral movement in dense, fog-choked vegetation. The Triceratops did not watch for predators the way you watch for traffic. It hunted them. Every step of its 12-ton frame sent subsonic vibrations rippling through the swamp. Ripples in the water. Tremors in the mud. A tyrannosaur attempting a stealthy approach would betray its position long before visual contact. The prey had become the sensor. The herbivore had become the surveillance system. Its skull alone was the size of a small car. Imagine a predator attempting to ambush a creature whose entire forward third was a biological radar dish, mounted on a chassis that could pivot and charge in under 2 seconds. But the most terrifying adaptation was not offensive. It was what happened when an attack failed. The massive frill extending from the back of the skull was not decoration. It was not a mating display. It was a regenerative Riot shield constructed from fibrolamellar bone, highly vascularized tissue capable of healing at speeds mammalian biology cannot replicate. Picture it at the cellular level. A puncture wound tears through the frill. 8 feet of shattered biological shielding. In a mammal, this is permanent damage. In the Triceratops, it is Tuesday. The fibrolamellar matrix activates. Blood vessels flood the wound site. New bone tissue begins crystallizing across the gap like frost spreading across glass. The shield knits itself back together. The animal survives. The animal learns. And now the open loop closes. A specimen designated LeRex, a 40-foot Tyrannosaurus, was recovered with a catastrophic puncture wound in the back of its left femur. The angle of entry proves the horn struck from behind, while the predator was standing upright, while it was facing away. The herbivore did not defend itself. It attacked. Another fossil, known as the dueling dinosaurs, preserved a Tyrannosaur and Triceratops locked in death. The predator's skull was cracked. Its teeth were shattered. Its finger bones were broken. The Triceratops had a single tyrannosaur tooth lodged in its frill. One tooth. Against a broken skull, snapped fingers, and destroyed jaws. This was not a fight. This was an execution. But biology alone does not forge a creature like this. Something had to create the pressure. Something had to make overwhelming violence the only viable survival strategy. That something was hell. The Hell Creek Formation. 68 million years ago. A subtropical death swamp stretching across what is now Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. Feel the atmosphere. Humidity so thick it coats your lungs. No escape routes. No high ground. Just endless, claustrophobic vegetation pressing against your body from every direction. The temperature never relents. Subtropical heat, constant metabolic stress, the kind of warmth that makes every movement an expenditure of resources you cannot afford to waste. Darkness arrives differently here. Fog rolls through the swamp in banks so dense that visibility drops to meters. You cannot see what is coming. You can only feel the vibrations in the water. The subsonic thud of something massive shifting its weight in the mud. And then you hear it. Not a roar. A silence. The kind of silence that means 12 tons of armored aggression has stopped moving and started aiming. This environment did not reward cunning. It did not reward cooperation. It rewarded mass. It rewarded armor. It rewarded the willingness to strike first and strike harder than anything else in the swamp. A Triceratops fossil was recovered 13 centimeters above the KPG boundary layer, the geological scar left by the asteroid that ended the Cretaceous. 13 centimeters. In geological terms, this is nothing. A blink. This fossil represents the youngest non-avian dinosaur ever discovered. While other species collapsed around it, while the ecosystems burned and the food chain shattered, this creature was still alive. Still standing. Still armed. It did not die from the asteroid. It was the last dinosaur standing. We project mammalian morality onto these creatures. We assume meat-eaters are the aggressors and plant-eaters are the victims. We assume solitary animals are vulnerable. We assume cooperation is the supreme survival strategy. The Triceratops shatters every projection. A diet of ferns fueled the most hyper-violent, apex-destroying organism of its era. Solitude was not a weakness. It was a feature. There was no herd to slow it down. No social obligation to dilute its aggression. And those puncture wounds from Act 1? The 14% of skulls bearing the marks of their own kind? Those were not random acts of violence. That was quality control. Triceratops spent their entire existence brutally impaling each other. Testing each other. Breaking the weak. Eliminating the slow. Only the most violent, most unbreakable genetics passed to the next generation. Those intraspecies battles were the crucible that forged the weapons capable of shattering the tyrant king. If the ultimate survivor of the dinosaur age was not a cunning predator, not a social cooperator, not an intelligent problem solver, but a solitary, hyper-violent biological tank that solved every problem with overwhelming force, what does that say about the traits nature truly rewards? The swamp falls silent. The Triceratops stands alone. And somewhere beneath the mud, the bones of a tyrannosaur tell a story we spent a century refusing to believe.